Welcome, everyone. This is SciStarter Live. This is a virtual event series where we stream on Facebook and to our Zoom friends to talk about a certain topic. So right now, today, we're doing a redo-ish / hybrid new questions and new participation about National Dog Day. This was our first event ever for SciStarter Live, and we are officially 1 year old, which is really exciting. So we're happy to have you all here, and we are going to be talking to Dr. James Serpel about halfway through to talk through your questions specific to your dogs. But before then, we have some information about how to participate in the project C-BARQ and what they do as a project. What is their purpose behind being there? So just so you're aware of the baseline of what they are actually accomplishing, they have a database of 50,000 dogs and more. This is last year's data, so there's definitely more since then, on behavior and about breeds and how that behavior matches up. So researchers are asking questions specifically about service dogs, working dogs, and just your pets. So if you have a dog who's not any of those things and just like ridiculous and lovable and whatnot, all of your dogs are able to be used within the C-BARQ family of data, right? So we do look specifically in C-BARQ for aggressive behaviors and fear behaviors too, which we're going to ask some poll questions about soon. So that should be a fun way to share what your dogs do. No shame, by the way. I've had dogs that have done crazy things, and I've realized like sometimes I didn't train them well, or my family just didn't care enough to train, or they're too small and you just like think you don't have to train them. All those things, no matter, share what you can, share what you want. You can add things in the chat if you want to add in more info. And then we will, it's just about sharing what we think and helping the science forward, right? So Dr. James Serpel is the professor of ethics and animal welfare emeritus at the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. He researches animal behavior topics. So this is everything to do with C-BARQ. So behavior specifically with all dogs, I guess, and working dogs. He does work with some feline cats as well. And there's a ton of other topics that he covers that I just didn't have room for in here. So we can ask him a bit about more later on. Okay, so I'm going to give him a little brief introduction too, so that you know who we're talking to. This is from last year, if you are interested.
Hi, everyone. Oh. I'm a big fan of...
I'm not sure I shared my audio. Roland, can you hear that? Oh, cool. Okay, just kidding.
Citizen science, as you might have gathered. And my project is called the C-BARQ. It's based at the University of Pennsylvania, which is where I am. I'm a professor of animal welfare. And I started this C-BARQ project really because I wanted to know about the prevalence of behavior problems in the pet dog population, because we know that behavior problems are a big deal. In fact, it turns out more dogs die because of behavior problems than any other cause, especially in the first 3 years of their life. So more dogs get taken to animal shelters because of behavior problems, where often they get put down. And a lot of people take their dogs to their veterinarian for the same reason. And so it's a sort of pressing problem as to how prevalent these problems are in pet dogs and what they're associated with. In other words, can we pin down some of the factors that are associated with a higher risk of dogs developing these types of problems? So that's how it all got started, but it's taken on a life of its own now since then. And now this C-BARQ survey, which we developed, is being used in all sorts of interesting and unexpected ways.
Awesome. And we're going to hear a lot more from him based on some questions from last year. So if you do want to do this along with us and talk about your dog on the survey, there is the website that you can go to. It is scistarter.org/c-barq fee-barq. The fee-barq is if any of you have cats, you can answer those questions too. And then when you hit the visit button, it'll send you to create a profile on the C-BARQ website. We're going to skip over that part for sake of time. And then you'll just be thinking about your dog while you take these surveys. And you can make one for each of your dogs if you have more than one, or if you are doing it for multiple people and whatnot, etc. So those are the instructions. This is what it will look like in order to participate. So when you go to continue to C-BARQ and fee-BARQ, you'll be taken to that website. And we're going to drop that website in the chat, but I cannot do that myself. And Roland will do that momentarily. All right, great. So if you do want to follow along, you may. When you get to this page, it'll look like, oh, wrong thing. Sorry, go back. So when you get to that page, we're going to skip over some of it. So the video that'll play in a moment here, the reason I have Ready Samson on here is because we're going to learn from the perspective of Anna's dog, who was the host of the last time we did this. So we're going to learn about Samson, and this is Samson. I really want to make just 1,000 GIFs of dogs now after seeing this. So we'll get started. You're welcome to follow along and do your own version of it, or you can just listen, relax, and do it later.
Once your C-BARQ account is created, then you're just ready to go. So I'm going to add my first dog and add Sammy Boy, who is elsewhere in the house, not hanging out with us, only a little offended. So Samson does not have a referral. He's just my pet, and I'd like to learn about his behavior. This first question is important because, like James said, there are researchers studying not just pet behaviors, but all sorts of other things. So you might have a service dog or some other type of working dog. So it's really important to make sure your dog results get filed under the right category. So let's keep filling this out for Samson. So I won't read every single answer that I have for Samson, but I am going to use the excuse to talk about my dog. So first, the survey asks you a bunch of basic info: age, breed, gender, and so on. So I got Samson from a rescue. He's a big boy, 95 pounds now, not in this picture. This is his puppy picture, of course. All right, so that's all the basic info. So Samson has been successfully added to the database. So now we can just dive right into the survey. So it's just a questionnaire asking about your dog, and you rank for this section, the training and obedience section, you'll rank your answers. Does your dog do these certain behaviors? Never, seldom, sometimes, usually, or always. And I found it was pretty easy to like categorize my memories into those bins. So let's see, does Samson return immediately when called off the leash? I said sometimes. He's definitely a good boy when he wants to be. He knows the commands, but if he's busy, maybe he doesn't really come. He's really good at sit though, and he's even better at stay, not counting when he's awkwardly sitting in a chair on a Zoom call, but he wasn't really into that. But I thought he's very attentive, but he's a little aloof. He's not like the sharpest dog. So I said he was sometimes slow to learn new tricks, sometimes easily distracted.
We learned so much about Samson in the last one, and there is much more. Oh, of course, I don't know how to hit buttons. There we go. Okay. So now based on those intro questions, we want to know what's happening with your dog. So there's a couple of different poll questions that we added in here to represent the different, couple different sections, 2 sections specifically. So I'll go ahead and launch this poll. That should be this next question. Does your dog show an obsessive interest in chasing or fetching thrown objects, balls, toys, etc.? With your answer, then we will know how common that is. And then we have some information from Dr. Serpel about what that means for your dog. So I'm not going to leave you hanging with just like, yeah, he does that, but what does that matter? Or like, what does that mean? We've got 62% participated, a couple more. Show an obsessive interest. So this means just fetching. The game of fetch never ends, right? That's awesome. Okay. 87%. Nice. All right. We'll go ahead and end that poll. It looks like, and I'll share those results for you. So usually is the top category of 43%, and then always being 29%. Seldom and sometimes, that's more along the lines of the dogs that I know, as they're really bad at fetch. We're just not super into it. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so we can learn about what that actually means. So tell us, Dr. Serpel.
What does this question tell you about your dog?
What's interesting there, those dogs that
I think audio is
for
gone.
these dogs that have this kind of obsessive play interest.
That's my fault. Sorry. Here you go.
What's interesting there, those dogs that score usually and always for this question are the kinds of dogs, for example, that are selected for scent detection work. So that might be search and rescue or bomb detection or drug detection. They're always looking for these dogs that have this kind of obsessive play interest, because the primary method they use for training these dogs is with a toy, by hiding toys and finding dogs that are absolutely obsessive about finding that toy and bringing it back. And so this kind of confirms the fact that, you know, not all dogs are cut out for that sort of high energy work and very obsessive kind of work that we look for in these special kinds of dogs, which is all the more reason to, I guess, be kind of proud of your dog if he or she does show this kind of behavior, even though sometimes it can be a nuisance. You know, I've known dogs that will just never stop. You know, they'll bring you anything to try and initiate a play session. And if you throw that thing once, even if it's a paperclip, they'll go on bringing it back and bringing it back and bringing it back until you're like, wait, you know, let's take a break from this. And the dog doesn't want to take a break. The dog's got, you know, is so obsessively keen on this activity that they don't want to give up. And so it can be a bit wearing if you're the owner of one of these dogs, but maybe you should consider channeling this amazing behavior into, you know, something really useful, like helping find endangered species, or, you know, helping to rescue people from buildings that have collapsed, that kind of thing.
That'd be incredible if my dogs could have been been searching for.
And what does this question tell you about?
Or for endangered species. That's an incredible ability. So if any of your animals are capable of that, that's incredible. All right. So there are multiple sections of this. We'll only go through 2 sections. So this is the second one. And then there are several more. So you'll see at the top here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. So it's a long survey, but it's thorough, and there's a good reason for that. So when I go,
Section 2 in the C-BARQ survey is on aggression. So you'll see some of Samson's answers here are pretty low. He's a big softie. You can take his food away and stick your hand in his mouth, and he won't nip at you at all. A few questions that stood out to me for my dog were when toys, bones, or other objects are taken away by a household member. I've seen like a little bit of feistiness there. And the biggest one was when mailmen or other delivery workers approach the home. If somebody comes up to the door, Samson is definitely going to bark.
And that's probably the most common form of aggression we see in dogs.
Yeah.
After all, we've bred dogs for thousands of years to guard our property and guard their territory, if you like. And so it's not surprising that quite a lot of them show this type of behavior. And interestingly, the mailman always reinforces the behavior by running away after he's delivered the mail.
That's the part I love the most, is the fact that because the mailman runs away, we're just.
Section 2 in the C-BARQ survey is.
Need to hit the right button. There we go. All right. So I am curious if you have seen your dog show hostility toward other dogs when they walk on a leash. So leashed versus unleashed can be a significant difference. And this is included in that section about aggression. So I'm going to go ahead and hit polls and start that next one. Yes, there we go. Does your dog show hostility, toward other dogs when they're walked on a leash? Yeah. Okay. This is pretty split so far. Wow. Okay. Huh. Interesting. And then we'll get to know why. Does your dog show hostility? Okay. So that's excellent. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. So it's pretty split, but a lot of you are saying never or seldom. So it can happen sometimes. And then 17% is usually. So I find it interesting. The one of you who is usually, I want to know how you feel about the next commentary about it.
So this is quite a common problem. So even dogs that get on fine with other dogs when they're off leash become very, very aggressive when they're on leash. And we don't fully understand why this is. There's all kinds of theories that the dog is maybe feeling protective of the owner and doesn't want an unfamiliar dog coming towards that close to their owner. Or it may be that being on the leash makes the dog feel more vulnerable in some way and therefore more defensive. But it's quite a common problem. And, you know, I often hear it from dog owners that, well, my dog's fine with other dogs as long as he or she's off the leash and able to run around and play. But as soon as he's on the leash, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah. And good timing, or not early, we're a little bit behind. I apologize, Dr. Serpel. Thanks for joining us. We are still going through some of your videos, but I'm so glad you could join us. There's already some things going through the Q&A, so we'll be addressing those separately. But I'm having them go over polls. So if you want to add on to any of your commentary here, feel free, but I apologize, you're gonna be listening to your voice at least one more time.
So this is
That's okay.
Not that time. Thanks so much. All right, so on the same topic, again, we want to know, does your dog guard or protect material? So bones, food, etc. I'll go ahead and start that one up in a moment here. There we go. Launch. Ta-da. Guards, snaps their food, bones, toys, or favorite toys, etc. All of the above. I had a dog as a kid that we never trained properly, and it was, I don't know how he ended up so food aggressive, but he was very food aggressive, shockingly. But that might be a question I ask Dr. Serpel in a moment here, after we hear his original response, because maybe it'll be answered. I don't recall. All right, one or two more of you to respond. I'll wait another moment. 3, 2, 1. All right. You guys have well-trained dogs. All right, we got never, we've got seldom, we've got sometimes. So never, or not a lot of usually, or none for usually and always. So that's great that you have dogs that are super relaxed. I have had a problem dog, meaning we didn't train him. So not good. Awesome. All right, I'm going to stop my share and keep moving forward. There we go. All right, so why is this happening?
So this is the most common form of aggression directed towards, you know, familiar people in the dog's household. It's commonly known as resource guarding. In other words, the dog has taken possession of something that it values very highly, and it doesn't want anybody taking it away from him or her. And it's not common, I have to say. It's a kind of it's a relatively uncommon behavior, but it does occur. And obviously, if it's, you know, if a dog shows this in an extreme form, then it's much more concerning, because the dog may actually bite or stab. Particularly dangerous in the context of small children, you know, who may just inadvertently wander too close to the dog when the dog's in possession of something it really likes, and then you get the child gets snapped at or bitten. Often on the face, unfortunately, because children's faces are about the same level as many dogs. And that inevitably results in a sort of a relatively serious injury, and can cause no end of grief, not only for the victim of the bite, but also for the owners of the dog, and so forth and so on. And it's a common cause of people rehoming their dogs or getting rid of their dogs or relinquishing their dogs to shelters.
I hope that has never happened to any of you. Does not sound
So this is
there we go. All right, next question. Does your dog bark furiously whenever somebody comes to the front door, or rings the doorbell? So this is kind of like the mailman question from before. Do we have any dogs that are just like, cannot handle the Amazon packages, cannot handle the food drop-offs? How do we feel about those things? Oh, did it work? Oh, yes, it did. You guys are just very quick. Awesome. Okay, I'll wait another like 3, 2, almost 100% participation. No? Okay. Suit yourself. Awesome. Okay, so we've got usually and always, and also seldom, split evenly. That's awesome. So none of you are saying it never happens, which makes sense to me. But yeah, I've never had a dog actually be very cool about listening to the doorbell, right? And why is that happening? Let's find out.
A lot of dogs have guarding type behavior sort of really in their genes, I think, and they will show this type of behavior very commonly. There also seems to be a kind of a developmental trigger. So if they're exposed to something that they felt was threatening near their house when they're around 6 to 8 months old, there seems to be a kind of what you might call a critical period or a sensitive period in development for the development of this behavior. And dogs that don't develop it by that age may never develop it. And dogs that do develop it at that age never lose it. They keep it.
Awesome. All right. We have 2
A lot
more
of
polls
dogs
to
have-
share. Go. But before we do that, we have a section 3. So if any of you are doing the surveys with us and would want some tips just so you can see what Anna was doing last year, here's a description for the section 3, and then we'll ask 2 questions about those to talk about.
So the next section on C-BARQ is fear and anxiety. Samson's pretty fearless when it comes to being approached by children and things like that. So he got all no's.
So on that topic, with children, like I have a dog who's very, very chill with children. My parents have 2, one who is very anti-kids and one that is not anti-kids and just chill, except for the sibling will convince her that children are scary, which is
So
not
the
nice.
next section on C-BARQ is fear and anxiety.
So in relation to anxiety and fear, etc., thunderstorms can be a big part of that. So do any of your dogs have issues with thunderstorms or fireworks? I personally have issues with fireworks. It's a personal problem. But we got a good chunk of them. Wow, split 100% down the line. That is hilarious. Okay, about 3, 2, 1. Anyone else? All right, ending the poll. That is fascinating. So the majority is in never, but that's not a significant amount of people. So that is interesting. That's all spread across. That's pretty great. So good for you all for having various levels.
It's a big problem for some dogs, really serious problem. These dogs that are thunderstorm phobic become intensely anxious and frightened during thunderstorms, as I'm sure that group of owners will testify. And it's a hard problem to deal with because even just a trace of a thunderstorm, just a sort of whisper of a thunderstorm in the distance, once these animals have developed this fear, is enough to trigger the same behavior. And of course, fear is a very unpleasant sensation. And so it reinforces the fear, as it were. The more fear they're exposed to, the more fearful they get. And so it's a very intractable problem and very, very bad for the dog's welfare as well.
Yeah. I'm going to drop the last poll question in there for you. So last one about this topic, which I found honestly to be the most interesting out of all of these was the concept of, does your dog balk when asked to cross slippery floors or sidewalk grates? Because I have a dog that does this.
It's a big...
Oops, sorry, there we go. But does that ever happen? So maybe that means like jumping over them or like staring at them intently on the ground and trying to find a way around them, being skittish around those things. Just one day, one of the dogs just decided never again crossing that grate. It's like the snow catcher where like the snow melts and it falls into the center of the driveway. And I think there was a snake in there. That's my suspicion, because there have been snakes in there. So I'm assuming she's afraid of snakes, but maybe Dr. Serpel will be like, no, there wasn't. Can that happen? Are snakes scary to dogs? They probably are, right?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I mean, we have
Yeah,
your,
I mean, they certainly would be if they've have encountered a snake. But a lot of dogs are also just frightened of, I guess you call it fear of heights or fear of falling.
oh,
Although it's not really a sort of major issue for most pet owners, it is a problem for a lot of working dogs, you know. So if, for example, a guide dog that can't walk across a grate or that can't go up and down a open riser staircase, that's a failure. I mean, that's a dog that gets disqualified. So it's a big issue for working dogs. But for the average pet dog, probably not a huge issue unless you buy a house with open riser staircases and suddenly your dog is incapable of going up or down those stairs because it's absolutely terrified of falling.
Right. Yeah, that would not be a good guide dog at all. that would not be good. And that's a great explanation. That's essentially what I remember from your previous one. So I'm going to go ahead and
Dogs that develop.
skip over that because that was perfect. Basically the same concept and more. So we had most of people said seldom it happens, but sometimes their dogs do have anxiety about crossing slippery floors or sidewalk grates. So it's interesting that it could happen like every once in a while or very specific circumstances. So kind of fun to be able to track like when does it actually happen, right? Awesome. Okay, so I just want to end the topic of the sections there because there are so many sections. When you go through, you'll see all of those things and be able to explain it based on your own dog. So it is thorough when you go through it, be aware of all that. And at the end, here's what it will look like. You get a full recorded or score questionnaire, or a scoring of the questionnaire. So this is what Anna had last year. So we have scores for Samson, who's an adorable puppy who's 90 pounds or whatnot now, where there are specific issues you can point out within here. So the ones that are noticeable to me, the big ones, right? Trainability, chasing, and then touch sensitivity. I want to say, oh yeah, down here, right there. What do the bar colors mean? So a level that most experts would consider serious or severe depending on the particular behavior involved. So even though this isn't super big as far as like the longest line here, it's still rated with high severity. So can you, or Dr. Serpel, are there any in here that you can name as being like even lower than this would be a big issue for any of these dogs off the top of your head?
Well, essentially, if the bar is red, that means you're pretty far from the average. So this dog is showing very high level of what we have labeled touch sensitivity, which is a dog that's just, it tends to cringe away from being touched on certain parts of its anatomy. It might be its head or it might be its rump. A lot of these dogs are become very frightened of going to the veterinarian because they're terrified of being handled by the veterinarian. That could be a learned response, because unfortunately, most vets love animals, but most animals don't love vets, and that's a problem for the animal because the animal learns to associate the vet with being uncomfortable or having something painful done to it. So it's a tricky one. I don't know if that's the case with this particular puppy, but it could be. Chasing behavior, that's very variable with breed. So some breeds of dog are much more inclined to chase small animals, say squirrels, rabbits, whatever, than others. And I don't know what breed this particular dog is or whether it's a mixed breed, but it may have a mixture of, for example, hound type dogs, which are well known for tending to chase things. That's kind of what they've been bred to do, and it's sort of, again, it's sort of innate in some sense for some of these dogs to chase.
Do you think it would be helpful for anyone who is planning on filling this out? I'm curious on behalf of you with my lack of dog scenario. Do you find this to be a helpful guide for people to bring into their vet and just share, or their vet, or even like if they're planning on doing training to share with the trainer or vet to talk through like ways to work in the home towards changing these things? Like, are these pretty trainable, or are some more trainable than others, so to speak?
Some are more trainable than others. So if there's a sort of strong instinctive component to the behavior, it's going to be harder to get rid of it or modify it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a learned behavior, then yes, you can work on trying to desensitize the dog to whatever it is that's upsetting it. You can just manage the problem better. And that's very often the case with some of these behavior problems, is that sort of advice you get is really about managing the problem. Just helpful hints on how to, situations to avoid, things to avoid doing to the dog. avoiding, punishing the dog when it does the behavior, because that almost always makes this problem worse. So that, it's about, and most of the advice that trainers and vets will give you is pretty logical, not very, not rocket science, but at the same time, very often, people find it useful. It starts them thinking in a different way about their dog, and starts them sort of down the path towards realizing that, this is the dog has a problem, and your role as the owner is to help the dog to overcome this problem. And punishing the dog for showing the behavior is not really helping the dog in any way at all.
Yeah, it just makes them sad.
Yeah.
Doesn't learn. Yeah. Okay. That is a great, we already kind of started, but I'm going to go ahead and stop my share in a moment here. I just want to point out this little doggo's name is Juniper. And one of our viewers sent this in to share on the screen. So thanks for sending this in. Juniper's adorable. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my share really quick so that we can talk through Q&A with our full faces. And then we'll come back to the PowerPoint after that. So, hi, Bob, welcome back.
Hey.
So Bob, you interviewed Dr. Serpel, so you're our backup too to keep us on track. So we have a full group here. But we did have questions in the chat, and I had a couple follow up from what we talked about before, including what to do about like the scans or the chart of responses you get after taking this. So when you finish your survey with that full set of information you have now, you can do something about it, right? You can learn about what to do with your dog, as mentioned just before. So I had a question for a family member who has a new baby in the family, and the dog is having touch sensitivity issues, I think is what's happening. So because of you mentioning like staying out of certain areas or avoiding certain behaviors, is there a way to help a dog learn about how to be okay and not have touch sensitivity with a baby, or is it just kind of a growing process through the kid growing up and learning too?
Well, yes. I mean, a great deal depends on the individual dog.
Yeah.
How big it is, how potentially dangerous it is. Certainly, you want to avoid putting the dog in any situation where it feels it can't get away from the baby. Also to get the dog to associate the baby's presence with good things like a treat or something like that. So the association switches from being a negative one to being a positive one. You don't really want the baby to feed the dog. That would be inadvisable until the baby's a bit older. But you do want to very, very carefully monitor any interactions between the dog and the baby, and try and, whenever the dog shows signs of looking uncomfortable, showing things like whale eye, where you start to see the whites of the dog's eye, that's a clear signal the dog's sending that it's very unhappy with this interaction, and you need to stop it by any means possible at that point, because it takes so little for a dog to injure a child. It really doesn't take much, especially with a large dog. Just a snap towards the face can, produce a severe injury, and you really don't want that. So it's really about, first of all, avoiding putting the dog in the situation where it feels threatened and it can't get away from the child. And also, intervening whenever the child starts to kind of go straight towards the dog, or grabs the dog or pulls the dog's fur or anything like that. Because that's what babies do when they first see these animals. And it's something that needs to be monitored very carefully.
Yeah, terrible, terrible. It makes you wonder about, I think always about like evolution of things. Like it's a bummer that babies are like, oh, we love dogs immediately. And I'm like, how did that happen? Why did we decide that was an automatic?
Well, some dogs are amazingly tolerant. So some dogs, they'll let the baby pull their ears, stamp on their tails, grab their fur, and the dog will just kind of seems to understand that this is a puppy, that this is a baby. and the behavior can be tolerated. But by no means all dogs are like that. Some dogs find children very, very threatening.
Right, yeah. Ooh, to be avoided then.
Yeah.
There was a question about using this at the beginning of school. So thank you to whoever sent this in. This is a great project to try at the beginning of school to get students to use used to recording their data. Would each student need to create an account to add data? Also, is there an age requirement? So a part of this too, I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a dog yourself, but you wanted to help someone else record the data for their dog, are you able to do it on behalf of someone else too? Because I think students, especially depending on age.
Yeah, in theory. I mean, the only trouble with them, I'm just trying to think. Yeah, if you're an individual, you can enter up to 3 dogs before the system says you can't enter anymore. There's a reason for that, because scientifically, if you have one person entering 25 dogs, it produces a kind of statistical bias in the results. So we cap it at 3 dogs. However, if like your school classroom teacher wants to register as a project, a school project, then that's fine. She can, or he or she can do that. It will cost $10 to register the project, but it's a one-off cost. And then they can enter as many dogs as they like, or they can basically ask each of their students, each of the kids in the class to do one for their dog at home, and then they can see the sort of collective results. So that would be a way of approaching that.
That's really cool. I never knew that was in existence. That's really awesome. I can imagine a lot of people wanting to do that just to get like specialized data about their project. So do they get their own like dashboard of data based on all of their specific project then?
Yeah, they do.
Oh, that's great.
Very cool. Hopefully that answered your question then. Age requirement, do you have a check for age requirement since it's a study?
No, I mean, when we do research, we normally cap it at 18, but there's no specific cap for the C-BARQ itself, the online version.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. Right. So last year, we had a conversation about research that had come up. I just wanted to bring that up just in case there was anything new. For anyone who's listening now or listens later, you can watch the original and learn about the research updates from there. But has anything changed over the last year, or anything you'd like to share as being more monumental in recent past?
Well, there's new things coming up all the time. In fact, I'm kind of a bit overwhelmed by the number of different projects that are using it now. Because the people tend to contact me and say, what does this mean? What should we do? There's most recently, there's been a lot of genetic studies that have used it, that are looking at the genetics of behavior. And some of those have been very interesting, I must say. They're sort of looking at the way in which behavior and genes sort of are associated through the kind of the ancestral history of the dog. The implication being that the dog is a product of humans selecting for particular types of behavior, probably for dogs' working roles, so different hunting roles or guarding or herding sheep or that type of thing. And you can see, you can sort of trace genetic lineages, and then you can map the behavioral lineages onto that genetic lineage, and they kind of work very well. They fit very well. It's kind of interesting.
And they're not necessarily the same as the breeds that people think of. It's just a whole separate. So you've discovered the actual breeds, I guess, even though they don't necessarily have official names.
Yeah, it produces some quite interesting and surprising results, where you would think 2 breeds would be very closely linked or very closely related genetically. And it turns out that they're not. They resemble each other a lot in behavior, but genetically they're quite distinct.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of those?
Well, some of the shepherd sheep herding breeds seem to be quite distinct from each other. That's complicated again by the fact that some of them are kind of multi-purpose and some are very specific purpose. So the border collie, as far as we know, has only ever been used to herd sheep. But something like the German Shepherd dog is a kind of multi-purpose dog it's derived from sheepdog breeds, but it then got used for a lot of military work and police dog work, and so it's had some complicated things in its ancestry.
Do you think we could use any of this? Is outlandish potentially and weird, but that just makes me think we might be able to figure out certain things about DNA in general in different species across the planet Earth by looking at the genetics of dogs. Is there any hope
and
that
people?
People. I didn't want to just say people just because we're.
It's certainly possible. I mean, we're, it's clear, for example, that some of the genes associated with behavioral differences in dogs are associated with the brain, the nervous system. So, and those are the same genes that have been identified as being associated with behavior in humans. So, there's a lot of commonality across species. At the same time, it's also possible that you would find like completely different genes producing the same outcomes in different populations. There's such a sort of a level of what I'd call indeterminacy between the gene and the behavior that you can get to the same endpoint by very different routes.
Right.
I was going to say obsessive compulsive disorder is one that a dog behavior is a model for understanding human behavior in OCD, which is kind of interesting, and not a lot of other species share that with humans, I don't think.
Yeah, that is quite true.
That's fascinating. I'm glad we talked about the obsessive like fetch behavior earlier.
Right.
So for anyone who answered like they always play fetch and it lasts forever, that's a good, or theoretic, is that a good example of that obsessive compulsive?
It could well be, yeah. There's certainly got an element of obsessiveness about it. So there's sort of a very intense drive to work, which we bred into some types of dogs, where they basically never give up. That's sort of the act of doing the job provides its own internal reward for the dog, and it's like it never exhausts itself. It's sort of addictive kind of behavior.
That's wild. I apologize, we're running low on time and I didn't even notice that entire time. So I'm just going to mention now for any of our attendees on Zoom with us, if any of you have questions or just want to share your lab partner with us, if you brought them along to be in the camera, you are more than welcome to put a hand raise up in the next couple of in the next two minutes, and we'll just turn you to panelists so you can turn your video on and show us your lab partner. Unless you want to call it by something else, I don't know. We don't all have labs, but while that's happening, and if you do have more questions too, you can view last year's. I did not have every question answered in this one, so if you want to know more, there is more. On that same topic, we can come back to the Q&A in a moment here. I'm just going to close this out to anyone who's watching and needs to leave in a minute. So there are a lot of other resources for you, and Roland will drop this into the chat for you. But we have a recent blog post about C-BARQ. And then the recent podcast that Bob did with James, that is available already. So that is on the podcast page. You can also get it on any website that you listen to your podcast to. And then there are a couple of projects where if you don't have a dog, you can still participate. So especially if you want to look at images of dogs or dog relatives too on our Instant Wild or the Instant Wild platform, which is like camera trap images and wildlife. There is one about coyotes specifically in Portland, if any of you are in the Pacific Northwest. And then the dog life experience study is a new one that has just been added. And that's if you are a dog owner, same probably situation as C-BARQ. And if you have a friend with a dog, you can motivate them or do it with them. So those are available to you. And then we have some upcoming events that I'll just briefly point out. So every week, or most every week, you'll hear from us anyway, live. Sometimes it'll be via social media telling you about the one we did last time. That was super awesome because we're fully at a year. Happy birthday, SciStarter Live. And we have two coming up that are particularly interesting about illnesses, about mosquito-borne illnesses, and also talking about indoor air quality to prevent illnesses. So we're at the beginning of school, and we're at the beginning of the fall where there's all kinds of allergies and whatnot. So feel free to join us for those. And then we also have Do NASA Science Live, which is on the 19th. That will take the place of this SciStarter Live episode, so to speak. So a million resources. I'll stop it there so that you don't have to listen to me chatter on in case anyone in here had questions more about dogs. But I appreciate you letting me just run through those things first. If you have a question, you're welcome to drop it in the chat, and we'll wait a couple moments while you do that. I think, yeah, that's about it. Dr. Serpel, was there anything that has come up? Maybe this was happening in the podcast too. I'm just curious if there's any like movements forward with C-BARQ, or if anything will change, or I don't know, future. I know you said you were overwhelmed with projects doing it. I'm curious how that all is going, or what it's being used. Yeah.
We're going to be adding some questions to the current C-BARQ. Really, these are questions that have come up through some research we've been doing with working dogs. And we're now interested in seeing whether we can apply this to pet dogs as well. So they're questions relating to things like how impulsive the dog is, how good it is at sort of controlling itself when faced with some kind of restriction or obstacle, or whether it's one of those dogs that just basically has to have what it wants immediately, which tends to be a problem in working dogs, but it's also a bit of a problem with pet dogs. We're looking at distractibility. That is to say, dogs that can't focus. It's an attention deficit type disorder, similar to what we find in humans. And of course, it interferes with learning and training and things like that. So there's a lot of interest in that dimension of dog behavior. And we're going to be adding some questions also about this, difficulty with handling different surfaces, or, sidewalk grates or slippery floors, things like that. And also playfulness, because playfulness, it turns out, is very important for training a lot of working dogs. They have to have a very high play motivation in order to learn, so to speak. And that's so we'll be adding questions to the C-BARQ going forward. They'll probably be voluntary. In other words, if the person just wants to do the original C-BARQ and nothing else, they can. But if they feel like, going on a bit longer and doing a bit more, we will certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm excited to see what we find out from all this. It's nice to see such a survey kind of build into, there are so many avenues that we can explore in different topics, especially for things that help people all the time, like working dogs and guide dogs. And last year you mentioned dogs that can find endangered species and whatnot. It's incredible what they can do, which is, it's great that we have. Yeah,
they're amazing animals.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and close this out for anyone who's staying on. We didn't have any extra ask for being on camera for their dog, and doesn't look like we had more questions, but feel free to reach out to us if you need anything. And you can find this recording tomorrow, and we'll send you the follow-up email. That's what I was gonna say. Oh, I did have one more picture of a dog and the robot, which I thought was really fun. So I'm just gonna show this while we send people off. Thanks everyone for joining.